on the last Friday of December 2006, in a quiet, middle-class suburb just outside Delhi. Two desperate fathers did something the police had refused to do for 2 years. They went looking for their missing children. What they found behind a 3-story bungalow in Noida's Sector 31 would shake an entire nation to its core. 16 human skulls, tiny bones stuffed into gunny bags, children's clothing tangled in the mud, and a question that would haunt India for nearly 2 decades. How could so many children vanish in plain sight? And why did no one notice until it was far too late? The thing about Nithari village is that it sits right on the edge of 2 different worlds. On one side, you have Noida's Sector 31, neat bungalows with high walls, cars and driveways, the kind of neighborhood where successful people come to escape Delhi's chaos. Clean streets, security guards, the illusion of safety. And then, just a stone's throw away, there's Nithari itself, a cramped settlement where the poor live in makeshift houses with tin roofs, where open drains run through narrow lanes, where children play barefoot in sewage because there's nowhere else to go. In 2005, something started happening in Nithari that should have set off alarm bells immediately. Children began disappearing. Not 1 or 2, many. A 5-year-old girl left home to buy something from a nearby shop and never came back. A 7-year-old walked to school one morning and vanished somewhere between his front door and the classroom. A 14-year-old girl stepped out on an ordinary afternoon and was never seen again. These weren't runaways. These were children who had no reason to run, who had families waiting for them, who had lives interrupted mid-sentence. Their parents did what any parent would do. They went to the police. They filed missing persons reports. They brought photographs, descriptions, timelines, everything they could think of. And the police did what they had been trained to do when poor people came asking for help. They did nothing. Or worse than nothing, they brushed the families aside with excuses that barely made sense. Children run away sometimes. She probably eloped. He'll come back when he's ready. The subtext was clear even when it wasn't spoken aloud. These were slum children. Children of domestic workers and rickshaw pullers. Children without influence or connections. In the calculus of who mattered and who didn't, these kids didn't register high enough to warrant real investigation. But the disappearances didn't stop. By mid-2006, the parents of Nithari had started comparing notes in hushed conversations, realizing with growing horror that it wasn't just their child. It was a pattern. Some began to suspect something darker was at play. There were whispers about a man in a car, about strangers offering sweets, about children last seen near the big houses in Sector 31. But whispers don't translate into police action, especially when the people whispering have no power. Living in one of those big houses was Moninder Singh Pandher, a businessman from Chandigarh who owned Bungalow D5 in Sector 31. To his neighbors, Pandher seemed unremarkable in the way wealthy men often are, well-dressed, polite at a distance, the kind of person you'd nod to but never really know. He had a wife and son who lived in Chandigarh while he spent time in Noida, ostensibly for business. His domestic help was a young man named Surendra Koli, poor and illiterate, who came from Uttarakhand and lived almost entirely at the mercy of his employer's moods and money from the outside. It looked like any other household in that neighborhood, a servant sweeping the driveway, groceries being delivered, the gate opening and closing on a predictable schedule. Nothing to see here, nothing worth questioning. Just another fragment of urban India where wealth and poverty exist side by side, separated by nothing more than a wall and an unspoken agreement not to look too closely at what happens on the other side. But in May 2006, one father refused to accept the police's indifference. His daughter, a 20-year-old woman named Deepika, known in case files as Pyle, had gone missing. Unlike most of the families in Nithari, he had one advantage: her mobile phone. He pushed the police, demanded they trace the number, refused to let the case disappear into the same bureaucratic void that had swallowed the others. Finally, reluctantly, the police acted. The phone signal pointed to an area near Sector 31, specifically around the home of Moninder Singh Pandher. When questioned, Koli was arrested briefly, then released on bail. The connection was noted but not pursued with any urgency. It was a thread left dangling, a clue that should have unraveled everything but instead got filed away and forgotten. Meanwhile, more children disappeared by late December 2006. The atmosphere in Nithari had curdled into something close to desperation. Parents no longer let their children play outside without watching them constantly. Rumors swirled through the lanes about organ traffickers, about kidnappers, about evil that wore a human face. And yet, officially, nothing was happening. No investigation, no arrests, just a growing list of missing children and a police force that seemed content to look the other way. That's when two fathers, men whose daughters had vanished into that same inexplicable void, decided they couldn't wait any longer. On December 29, 2006, they began searching the area around Pandher's bungalow themselves. They had heard things, whispers about a smell near the drains, about dogs behaving strangely, about something not quite right in the area behind the big houses. So they walked toward the municipal drain that ran behind bungalow D5. Following instinct more than evidence, what they found would haunt them for the rest of their lives: bones. At first glance, they might have been animal remains, something a dog had dragged in, something easily explained away. But then they saw the shape of a small skull, the curve of a child's jaw, a fragment of bright fabric that looked heartbreakingly familiar. These weren't animal bones. These were human. These were children. They called the police, and this time, there was no brushing them aside. Officers arrived, looked into the drain, and finally, began to see what Nithari's parents had been trying to tell them for 2 years. By the time word spread through the village, hundreds of people had descended on the scene. Parents climbed boundary walls, desperate to see, desperate to know if their child was among the remains. Media trucks arrived with cameras and boom mics. The blue and white police tape went up, fluttering in the December wind, marking the spot where India's illusion of progress collided with a horror it didn't want to acknowledge. Workers began excavating the drain, and with each passing hour, the horror deepened. More skulls, more bones, children's shoes, bangles, scraps of clothing, polythene bags containing what forensic experts would later describe as dismembered body parts. The count rose, 15, 16, possibly more, and with each discovery, the crowd's grief turned to rage. How could this have happened? How could so many children disappear and die within meters of a residential neighborhood, and no one noticed? Inside bungalow D5, the police moved quickly. Moninder Singh Pandher was arrested. Surendra Koli was taken into custody. The house was sealed. Evidence teams began combing through rooms, looking for anything that might explain what had happened. And almost immediately, the media narrative took shape. A wealthy businessman and his poor servant, a house of horrors, a drain full of children's bones. It was a story tailor-made for national outrage, and the outrage came swiftly. For the families of Nithari, those first hours were a blur of horror and something almost like relief. Relief that someone was finally paying attention, that the disappearances were no longer being dismissed, that maybe, just maybe, they would get answers. But relief is a fragile thing when you're standing near a drain where your child's bones have been pulled from the mud. One mother collapsed when she recognized a piece of her daughter's clothing. Another father stood silent, staring at the excavation site, unable to process what he was seeing. A grandmother kept repeating the same question over and over. Why didn't anyone listen to us? By nightfall on December 29th, the Nithari killings were no longer a local tragedy. They were a national scandal, broadcast on every news channel, debated in every living room. The images were seared into public consciousness. The drain, the skulls, the weeping parents, the house standing silent in the background like a monument to everything that had gone wrong. When Surendra Koli was brought into the interrogation room in late December 2006, investigators already had the bones, the clothing, the list of missing children, and a crime scene that pointed directly at the house where he worked. What they needed now was a narrative, something that would connect these remains to specific acts, specific moments, specific hands. And according to official records, Koli gave them exactly that. He confessed, not just once, but repeatedly, during custodial interrogations, under narco-analysis, and later in a statement recorded before a magistrate. He described luring children into the house when his employer was away. He talked about strangling them in the drawing room. He explained how he dismembered the bodies in an upstairs bathroom and carried the remains to the drain behind the house in polythene bags. The confessions were detailed, consistent, and deeply disturbing. For investigators under immense pressure to solve the case quickly, it looked like a breakthrough. A suspect who not only admitted guilt but described his crimes with chilling specificity. But even as the case against Koli solidified in public perception, cracks were forming in the investigation itself. The Central Bureau of Investigation took over the case in January 2007, acknowledging that the local police had failed catastrophically. A CBI team arrived with forensic experts and began a more systematic examination. They found more remains near the bungalow, additional bones that had been missed in the initial chaos. They documented everything, photographed everything, cataloged every piece of evidence they could find. Yet the deeper they looked, the more uncomfortable questions emerged. How had this gone on for so long without anyone noticing? The investigation revealed that police had received multiple missing children reports dating back to 2005 and possibly earlier. Reports that had been ignored, downplayed, or actively dismissed. Parents had come again and again, insisting something was wrong, only to be told their children would return on their own. The negligence was so egregious that multiple officers were eventually suspended, but by then, the damage was done. 2 years of inaction had given whoever was responsible an open field to operate. And then there was the question of Moninder Singh Pandher. He insisted he knew nothing about the crimes, that he was often away from the house, that Koli must have acted without his knowledge. Early CBI charge sheets seemed to support this, giving Pandher what amounted to a clean sheet in most cases while focusing the blame squarely on the servant. But could that really be true? Could so many children vanish into a house, so many bodies be cut apart and carried through rooms, so many remains end up just behind the boundary wall, and the owner remain genuinely oblivious? It was a question that would follow the case through nearly 2 decades of trials. Forensic teams worked to identify the victims wherever possible, using DNA samples and personal belongings brought by families. Some names emerged: Rimpa Holdar, 14 years old; Arti Prasad, just 7, a 5-year-old girl whose family had been searching for her since 2006. Others remained unidentified, known only by the bones they left behind. The process was slow, painful, and incomplete. Meanwhile, theories swirled. Was this connected to organ trafficking, given the systematic way bodies were dismembered? Were medical professionals involved? Some investigators initially pursued this angle, but it led nowhere. Then there were allegations of cannibalism, based largely on portions of Koli's narco-analysis statements. The idea dominated headlines, turning the Nithari case into something almost mythic, a horror story so extreme it felt unreal. But forensic evidence never conclusively proved cannibalism, and the CBI eventually dismissed it as unsubstantiated. What remained certain was this: children had died. Their bodies had been cut apart and disposed of like garbage. And the system designed to protect them had failed at every conceivable level. In February 2009, a special sessions court in Ghaziabad handed down its first major verdict. Moninder Singh Pandher and Surendra Koli were both found guilty in the murder of 14-year-old Rimpa Holdar, one of the earliest identified victims. The judge classified it as rarest of rare and sentenced both men to death. For many watching, it felt like the system was finally doing what it was supposed to do, holding someone accountable for unspeakable crimes. For the families of Nithari, the verdict brought a grim satisfaction. Though no amount of legal punishment could bring their children back, over the next decade, Koli accumulated death sentences the way some people collect parking tickets. Case after case, victim after victim, the pattern repeated: guilty verdict, death sentence, another name added to the list. By 2019, he had been convicted in multiple cases, earning him the media nickname Butcher of Nithari. He spent years on death row, coming within months of execution more than once. Pandher's legal journey was messy, convicted in some cases, acquitted in others, leaving a confusing patchwork of verdicts that never quite added up to a coherent narrative. But behind the scenes, something else was happening. Appellate courts began re-examining the foundations on which those convictions had been built. How reliable were confessions obtained during police custody, especially from a poor, illiterate man with limited understanding of his legal rights? How carefully had physical evidence been collected and preserved when the crime scene was overrun with villagers and media within hours of discovery? Had the chain of custody been maintained? Were forensic procedures followed correctly? The answers, increasingly, were troubling. Judges noted that much of the prosecution's case rested on Koli's custodial confessions that were technically inadmissible under Indian law. They pointed out that the initial investigation had been conducted with what one court later called casual and perfunctory attention to proper procedure. They observed that grave suspicion, no matter how intense, could not replace proof beyond reasonable doubt. And then, in October 2023, came the verdict that shocked a nation. The Allahabad High Court acquitted both Surendra Koli and Moninder Singh Pandher in 12 cases, sharply criticizing the investigation and ruling that the evidence was insufficient to sustain the convictions. After 17 years of believing the case was solved, India suddenly faced the possibility that it had never really been solved at all, that the real story had gotten lost somewhere between public outrage, media spectacle, and an investigation more concerned with finding someone to blame than with finding the truth. That by November 2025, the Supreme Court had completed the legal circle. It acquitted Koli in the final remaining case, ordering his release after nearly 19 years in custody. A man who had been sentenced to death multiple times, branded a serial killer in countless headlines, and held up as the face of pure evil walked out of prison legally innocent. Not proven innocent, just not proven guilty beyond the reasonable doubt that the law demands. For the families of Nithari, the acquittals felt less like justice corrected and more like justice abandoned. Some spoke bitterly about a system that had failed their children twice, first by not protecting them when they were alive, and then by not delivering accountability after they were dead. Others talked about exhaustion, about not having the money or strength to keep fighting. One father said quietly that even if the courts had cleared the accused, there was a higher court, God's court, where justice would still be done. It was the only comfort left to ask what really happened in Nithari between 2005 and 2006. Who killed those children? Was it the servant who confessed under conditions we'll never fully understand? Was it the wealthy businessman who claimed ignorance? Was it someone else entirely? Someone who slipped through the cracks while the system rushed to close the case? Nearly 20 years later, the courts have essentially said they cannot answer with the certainty required to send anyone to death. And maybe that uncertainty is the real horror of Nithari, not just the brutality of what was done, but the way the system failed at every single stage, from prevention to investigation to prosecution, until the story ended not with justice, but with a question mark. The drain behind Bungalow D5 is empty now, running with ordinary sewage. The house has been returned to being just another property in a crowded city. Files have been closed in police stations where new complaints pile up, new names, new faces. But in the lanes of Nithari village, parents still remember. They remember the children who disappeared. They remember going to the police and being turned away. They remember the December morning when bones started coming out of the ground. And they remember that when the legal system finally ran out of answers, it simply walked away, leaving them alone with their grief and a haunting question that no court was willing to definitively answer. Who killed the children of Nithari? In the end, perhaps that's the most disturbing legacy of this case, that in a country of more than 1 billion people, with sophisticated police forces and courts and forensic labs, 16 children could vanish and die almost within sight of their homes. And nearly 2 decades later, no one stands convicted. The Nithari killings aren't just a crime story. They're a mirror held up to a system that looks away when the victims are poor, that rushes to judgment when the pressure is on, and that ultimately can't deliver the one thing those families deserved most: the simple truth of what happened to their children.